Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. Y'all, I gotta get some real talk going with ya. I am not a flawless individual. Shocker, I know. You see, dear listener, before I started LARPing as a dragon on the internet to pay my bills, I was something much worse. Yes, as much as it pains me to admit it, I was an alpha male. Gag. I was so obsessed with lifting heavy things and putting them back down that I developed a superiority complex. Because I had grown my own six-pack, I was magically better than everyone else. Ironically, I'm much stronger and happier now that I've dropped that shit. And if I had a time machine, I'd love to put younger me's head through a wall to show him just how alpha he really was. So when I see all these deluded men online start referring to themselves and others as different letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, sigma, I don't know, fucking gamma, I feel a profound sense of disappointment, not unlike the one my dad experienced while scrolling through my search history when I was in high school. I was lucky enough to mature out of my machismo phase in my own private Kratos arc. However, not everyone has my luck. And I say luck because it sure as wasn't self-awareness. The story I have for you today stars a player whose obsession with being the alpha male leads him down a path that, and I'm no expert here, comes off as pretty fucking beta. Also, he's a furry, so there's that. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG-Horrorstories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from a throwaway account and is titled Problem Player Sigma Male Takes Things to a Physical Level. Hi all, this happened fairly recently. This is a story about a very, very deluded individual with a fortunate happy ending. I wanted to wait a while to post this because I wanted to talk to almost every party member to get the most accurate picture of what happened. It took a little longer because of school nearing the end of the semester for us all. I am using a throwaway account because the people involved are Redditors as well. If the player who is the cause of all this mayhem sees this, you know what you did. Please, I am asking you to step away from the internet and seek help. You need it. Marked NSFW for language and some adult themes. Note that this may be a long read. There are a lot of details that I feel need to be included, so here's a fair warning that if you don't like longer posts, skip. So I have a Discord server with 3 of my closest friends. Let's call them Dan, Bob, and Jess. We have been playing video games with each other for years and recently wanted to get into D&D. Around the time we wanted to start, Jess got a new boyfriend. We will call him Gunk. Gunk, at first, didn't seem like a problem at all. He was on the quiet side, but once he got used to us, he was talkative and friendly. As he was also a huge gamer, he played video games with us daily. Even in the competitive atmosphere, he never lost his friendliness towards us. To be honest, it was nice having a new person around to play with. Also, Jess and Gunk were a fairly closed-off couple. What I mean by that is that they never went into big displays of affection for each other when spending time with us to not make us uncomfortable. So why would I name him Gunk? Well, because for some reason, D&D apparently was the key to unlocking his inner demons. We knew from gaming and hanging out that Gunk was a bit of an edgelord. He was always drawn to edgy characters and themes in the games we played. We also later learned that after this mess from Jess, that Dan, Bob, and I all made him feel inferior. I say this because I think it provides insight into how his campaign-ruining character was created. Also, just a little side note, I believe edgelords are not inherently bad. I think they can potentially provide interesting party dynamics. However, the way Gunk went about his character was just awful. Also, extra side note, this was everyone's first exposure to D&D except for Gunk. So we are going to make a lot of dumb rookie mistakes. Anyway, let's get into what happened. We all discussed playing D&D and invited Gunk to join us. Jess wanted to be the DM and got to work on a campaign with the help of her dad, a big D&D veteran of over 20 years, while the rest of us made characters. We ended up having a session 0 with no input on what the campaign was about. Jess wanted to start with us waking up in a mysterious dungeon with no memory, but she didn't say that until we started. So Session 0 was just us players making a party comp that was balanced and sharing our backstories and such. If anyone wants to know, here's the lineup. Me, a mountain dwarf fighter. Bob, a tiefling bard. Dan, a human wizard. Gunk, a wolf-born rogue. So one of these things is not like the others. Gunk homebrewed his race. He described them as part wolf, part human with a tragic history. He had a +3 for dexterity and wisdom, +2 for strength, +1 for initiative, dark vision, and advantage to wisdom and dexterity saving throws. Jess, not knowing any better at first, said that the race was fine, but Dan was a little suspicious and eventually compared Gunk's wolfborn to the other handbook races. Dan would then say that Gunk's race was absurdly more powerful than anything the handbook offered. When shown the evidence, Jess agreed and said that Gunk would need to figure out something else. Gunk grudge counter 1. Gunk was a little unhappy that Dan was so determined to ensure that his creative vision didn't see light, and blamed it on Dan's distaste for tragic or dark themes in video games. Now, a little background as to why he said that is because Dan is, in fact, not a fan of edgy characters and such. He is fine with them being in games and all, but he's never one to actually take an interest in or like them. He thinks they are dumb, and unfortunately, Dan has faced a lot of domestic abuse and family death growing up. So when edgy characters go in depth about just how tragic and dark their backstory is, it hits Dan a bit different. Thankfully, the group ruled that this was not just because Dan wasn't a fan, but because Gunk's race was a lot stronger than it should be. Jess went back and forth with Gunk, and they made a compromise. Gunk's wolffolk kept the bonus to initiative and had a +2 to dexterity and a +1 to wisdom with dark vision. He chose rogue as his class. Then came Gunk's backstory. Brace yourselves, I don't recall word for word what he said, but it went something like this. Abandoned at birth and raised by wolves, Malice learned the hard way about winning or you die, and forced himself to push all he had to keep up with his canine family. Some goddess of wolves granted him to be part human and part wolf after recognizing his determination. He seeks to bring glory and conquer any challenge he comes across for his pack and goddess. Then one day he came home to his pack's lair to find them all dead, killed by human hunters. He killed them all and now wears their hair as a coat, and now has a newfound bloodlust to fill the cracks of this broken man. He then went into detail about how he suspects only the loving embrace of a woman who accepts his wild soul could potentially heal him. I'm gonna be honest, I was trying my hardest not to laugh. I was very glad we were playing in person and not online. So yeah, that was our party lineup. I'm not including anyone else's backstory because they don't really have too much relevance. With Session 0 out of the way, we set up a weekly time to play and had a solid amount of good sessions. We did, in fact, wake up in a dungeon and had to improvise a way out and fight off some basic weak undead enemies. When we found the light of day, we stumbled upon a village that was being harassed by a large goblin clan. The village elder offered a reward for us to scatter them and gave us a forward payment to buy proper equipment since the stuff we found in the dungeon was all improvised weapons and armor. Fast forward a few more encounters, we get to level 3 and manage to track down the goblin camp. After some college-educated planning, we decided to just break in and rush into the camp. We found ourselves swarmed instantly by a huge number of goblins. Gunk went first with his high initiative and managed to kill a goblin in one hit. He got a few good jobs from us. Next was Dan, who literally incinerated 18 of the little buggers with burning hands. We were all in an ecstatic uproar by this. Jess's dad happened to be nearby when this occurred and offered the idea that the rest of the goblins, save the chief, should be frightened for a few turns. Jess agreed and our spirits were raised higher. All except Gunk, of course, who spoke up about an apparent discrepancy. Gunk: wouldn't they be frightened when I'm near them because of my imposing appearance? Jess's dad: probably not. Gunk: what? Remember that my character is a 6'6" wolfman with a peak physique. How would that not scare him? Jess's dad: well, if you were trying to intimidate one of them, I'd probably give you an advantage, but goblins don't care what they fight. If they have the numbers, they will be confident in combat. Dan has taken that away, so now they're frightened. Gunk. I disagree, but okay. What if I killed their leader? Jess's dad.
Sure, if the leader dies, I'm sure they'll all be frightened in general. Remember, though, that Jess is the DM. What she says goes.
Jess. I think that they would be frightened. Gunk. Thank you. Gunk grudge counter 2. We ignored this outburst and continued the fight. I should note that all the goblins were level 1 to 2, but the leader was level 5. Despite the advantage that Dan had gotten us, we were still getting beat up pretty badly, and were running out of party healing with Bob's spells. Soon enough, the only party member capable of healing was Dan as a necromancer with Grim Harvest. Despite our situation, Gunk had the bright idea to disengage and run past the horde of goblins to fight the chief on his own. Gunk. I bare my teeth at the chief, demanding a duel between the two of us. Jess. You do what now? Gunk. I challenge the chief to a duel. Jess. Okay, well, given your character's instincts and general knowledge of goblin behavior, you know it is unlikely for the chief to honor a duel. Do you still wish to continue? Gunk. Sure, he'll need the help anyway. We proceed to watch the Goblin Chief bring Gunk down to 1 health in a single turn and no way to heal. We all had to discuss what to do since having a down party member would really hurt us right now. Dan suddenly pipes up. Dan.
I have a question. Grim Harvest says that I can heal when I kill with a spell. Is there any way I could transfer my healing to someone else?
Jess is silent for a few moments before calling her dad over. Jess's dad.
That's an interesting idea. I would say yes as long as you are within 10 feet of them and you already have full health.
We all then discussed the process of escorting Dan within 10 feet of Gunk and doing our best to ensure that he doesn't get harmed. Gunk remained silent this entire time. Our turn cycle and Gunk moves away from the chief. I use a reaction to body block a shot that would have hit Dan, and Dan manages to reach Gunk, killing another goblin in the process. However, it seemed that Gunk was not a big fan of being helped. Gunk grudge counter 3. Dan.
I would now like to transfer my healing to Gunk, in character. Allow me.
Gunk, in character? Save it, I don't need help. Dan.
You're barely standing, my friend.
Gunk. We aren't friends, get lost. It took the whole party to convince Gunk to grudgingly accept the healing. It saved his life as he took damage next turn, but managed to stay up. Together, the party kills the rest of the goblins, and Gunk gets the final blow on the chief. Brace yourselves, there is yet another Gunk moment coming up. Gunk. This killer's mine! The treasure he holds belongs to me. Me. Are you joking? This was a team effort. You do not get all the spoils. Gunk. Ha! The cub dares to challenge his alpha? Gunk then howls loudly, and to his credit, he sounded a lot like a wolf, which is ridiculous for 2 reasons. 1, it's cringe as hell. Seriously, why do people do that? 2, it means he's been practicing. We were all then jump scared by Dan's Great Pyrenees barking like crazy in the background of his mic. Apparently, Gunk was loud enough to pass through Dan's headphones. We listened to Dan yell until his dog finally quiets down. Dan.
I would like to respectfully request that you never do that again.
Bob. Yeah, look, I'm glad that you want to roleplay, but I don't think that howling into everyone's ears is a good idea. Gunk. I understand. My sincerest apologies, everyone. He had never talked this way before, so it caught me way off guard. Jess. The loot is also not all yours. It will be shared. Gunk grudge counter 4. We discuss the fair distribution of the loot, then head back to the village elder, who offers a gift to each of us. I just asked for a sum of gold. I think Bob and Dan asked for some jewels since the village was a mining village. Then Gunk asked for a night with the fairest maiden in the village. Jess awkwardly roleplays the village elder saying yes, but refuses to go into detail and tells Gunk that no one wants any details of this night that he spends either. We ended the session and I immediately contacted Bob and Dan to talk. We all agree that Gunk's strange behavior was very out of place for him. I suggested asking to kick him, but Bob said that Jess is not gonna kick her boyfriend unless he does something blatantly outrageous. Dan and I agreed that Gunk asking his girlfriend for that kind of prize is outrageous, but Bob argues that no one got hurt or angry, and it wasn't our place to make rules for their relationship. Fair enough. The next couple of sessions were fine again, but we would learn from Jess later that Gunk was not having fun. He then suggested to Jess a new rule to be put into play. Jess agreed, not wanting to lose him as a player. One session, Jess announced a new rule of experience distribution. Combat EXP would now be distributed on a weighted scale based on how much damage you contribute. More damage, more XP. The call was silent before I spoke up. Me. How is that fair? Bob.
Yeah, we have 2 damage dealers in the party.
Jess. Well, I wanted to make sure that everyone is equally compensated for their actions in combat. Bob.
Okay, well, shouldn't I get extra XP for healing or buffing?
Me. And shouldn't I also get extra XP for tanking and distracting enemies? Jess. No, I don't know how a working weight scale would work with all of that. Plus, damage is what usually ends the fight, so I think the emphasis should be put on that. Dan.
I am gonna be honest, I don't see how this helps anyone.
Gunk. What do you mean? Why are you so upset about it? It helps us, dude. We get rewarded for being good at our job. Anyone can just build a character to take a hit or be a musician playing behind us all. It takes skill to be a good damage dealer.
Me. That's a dick thing to say, buddy.
Gunk. I am just speaking the truth. Dan.
Okay, before we start screaming at one another, let's step back. I am not upset at this rule, but I do not think it should be a thing.
Dan goes pretty in depth about why he thinks this rule is dumb. I am paraphrasing here, but he basically says that allowing him and Gunk to grow stronger will only hurt them in the long end, because the party needs each other. Having a weak tank and utility will bring a lot of pressure on them. And while they are damage dealers, he points out that a lot of the damage they do is dependent on the crowd control Bob and I provide. Specifically, Gunk's sneak attack, and its dependence on my positioning. To our surprise, after about 30 minutes of them talking, Gunk actually agrees with Dan and the rule is abolished. Props to him for keeping us all calm and talking through the situation to a conclusion. So the session continued, and while Gunk agreed with what had happened, it still didn't fix the fact that he wasn't having fun. Now his greatest crime spree would start. There was a week when neither Bob nor Dan could play that night because of school-related things, so Jess announced that the session was canceled. Except, it wasn't. Gunk somehow convinced Jess to allow him to have a private session on his own. He even made a second character, a paladin, to tank for him. He played both in his own private session and was able to level up from it. You can imagine our surprise the next week when he pulled out 2 icons on the digital board for his characters, which were both level 5, compared to ours, which were all level 4. The group was not happy, and only got incredibly frustrated when Jess explained what had happened. I don't remember the argument, but eventually Jess agreed to revert his level back to ours. Gunk got to keep both characters, but was told that he couldn't play both at the same time. This somehow translated to Gunk that he could swap his characters out when he wanted, which was never discussed. During the middle of the fight, Gunk suddenly describes a glowing beam of moonlight shining on his character. We all hear a mighty howl of a wolf as his character shifts into a paladin of his wolf goddess. Dan.
Are you allowed to just switch like that? Also, I thought your characters were 2 separate people.
Gunk. That was only for that one session. I think it makes more sense for my character to instead have 2 forms. Bob.
Okay, so back to what I was trying to say before. He just gets 2 characters that he can just swap whenever. I get he's your boyfriend, but you can't give him special treatment like this.
Gunk. I cannot believe you just pulled that card. A true sign of a cub. Bob.
My man, I do not even know what the f*** that means.
Gunk. It means you're stupid and immature. Also, you just proved both of my points. Dan.
Hang on.
He's the stupid and immature one? You're trying so hard to play a wolf man to the extent of practicing howling and unironically adopting an alpha lingo. If you want to be a wolf so bad, get out there, find a pack, and sniff their assholes. Gunk grudge counter 5. Oh god, this story is making me cringe to the point where I had to take a break from reading it. Don't worry, this isn't a lead up to a sponsor, even though I know you guys really like those. Now, I never tried to shove furry bullshit into my alpha-isms, but I'll be damned if I don't recognize some of the patterns here. Buckle up, kids, because I'm going to invite you into the world of an internet alpha male for a sec. Think of it as an episode of Scared Straight, but instead of a convict talking to troubled teens, it's a cartoon dragon teaching you how to be a man, which is infinitely worse. If you want to skip this cutaway and get back to the story, here's a timestamp because I'm gonna take this way off the rails, and I've been looking for an excuse to talk about this on the channel anyway. Okay, so here's the reality of these so-called alpha males. It's basically summed up by the tried and true phrase of, fake it till you make it. Very rarely does the alpha male actually believe he's up on this pedestal that he's placed himself on. Quite the contrary, actually. Typically, these men are deeply insecure and feel like if they can demonstrate their superiority over others, they might actually convince themselves to believe it. Hell, some even do start to believe it, but subconsciously, there's still that little voice in the back of their heads telling them that they aren't good enough, which then leads to more posturing, which leads to the voice getting louder, which leads to more posturing, which leads to the voice getting louder. Until eventually, the fact that your arms and money pile are not as big as some randos on Instagram is enough to ruin your entire week. It doesn't take a genius to recognize that this is not a recipe for happiness. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the manosphere and guys like Andrew Tate, who encourage this me versus you mentality and frankly takes advantage of the surplus of insecure dudes that our masculinity hostile society has produced. Yeah, I know, I'll probably get some from all sides for saying that, but y'all canceled Joe Cat for saying I like girls, so you'll have to excuse me for not caring about what the internet thinks of me these days. It's because of you Twitter warriors that I'll never get my YouTube boxing match with the Catman, and I will never forgive you. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Daddy Drake's teaching his children how to be good men in a video about a cringy wolf man. What I wish I could have learned much sooner is that masculinity does not come from external sources. It doesn't come from how you assert your dominance over others and posture as this flawless paragon of biceps and Bugattis. The reality of masculinity is that it comes from within yourself, as corny as that sounds. It's having the ability to recognize your own strengths and weaknesses and then reacting to them. Notice how I said react, not accept. Having the courage to stare your own flaws in the face and recognize what it takes to be a better person is a lot more alpha than hiding your weaknesses under a thin veneer of being an alpha male. What it means to be masculine means different things to different people. But to me, it means writing your own damn script in this movie called life and having the internal, and let's not kid ourselves, physical strength to protect the vision that you have for your own life and all the people that you've invited into it. Alright, you got all that? You got all your notes all nice and organized? Because all that shit's gonna be on the test. Now how about we explore the results of what happens when being an alpha male affects your decision making, shall we? The session did not last long after this, and we ended up taking a week break of not really talking to one another. When we did get back, the session did not last long either. We left off in combat and continued from Gunk's turn. He stayed on his rogue. We were fighting 2 legendary orc warriors and managed to get one down. Gunk got the final blow on him and gave us a, "That's right, who's the alpha?" The other orc got really low, but not low enough for any of us to potentially finish it, save for Dan with an upcasted spell. I can't remember which it was, but I think it was Witch Bolt or Ray of Sickness. Anyway, Gunk went before Dan and did not like the idea of someone else getting a finishing blow on these enemies. Gunk: "My turn, right? I sneak attack Dan, 18 to hit. Since he isn't facing me, I can pull it off." Jess: Okay. Roll damage." Bob, Dan, and I in unison: "What?" Bob: "Party members cannot attack each other." Jess: "I am I'm making an exception here because Don did go a little far last session.
Dan, you gotta be kidding, right? Because Mr. Alpha Male got his bitchy feelings hurt, you're gonna let him attack me?
Jess. Yeah, you went too far.
Gunk, 32, he's down. Jess.
Alright, Bob, you're up.
Dan, I am not down. As a reaction, I used shield, which adds +5 to my AC, bringing it up to 19. His attack misses. Jess.
Since it's a sneak attack, I'm going to rule that you don't have time to take a reaction.
Dan. Oh my god, it is so obvious it hurts. Okay, let me read the rules of shield for you. Casting time, 1 reaction, which you take when you are hit by an attack or targeted by the magic missile spell. An invisible barrier of magical force appears and protects you. Until the start of your next turn, you have a +5 bonus to AC, including against the triggering attack, and you take no damage from magic missile. That is straight from the rulebook.
Gunk. You wouldn't have time to bring it up. My attack is too fast.
Dan. Oh, for f***'s sake, it literally says the triggering attack is subjected to the new AC, which means your attack misses here.
Gunk. You forget that my race is more powerful than your average realm dweller. My character is also blessed by a wolf goddess. Because of my determination, a strike like this would not miss.
Dan.
And my dad could beat up your dad.
I do not give a about your furry wolf wannabe badass. You do not get to change the rules. Gunk.
Jess, control your asshole friend, please.
Me. Dude, you can't just petition the DM to make whatever you want go just because she's your girlfriend. Gunk.
Jess?
Jess.
I don't know what to do.
Gunk.
Okay, well, since you always take their side and no one here is mature enough to take a hit to their pride, I'm leaving. This campaign sucks anyway. Bye.
And there he went. He left the call and the Discord server. Gunk was gone. We were all speechless, and Jess said that she should go talk to him and left. The rest of us remained in silence for a bit before switching over to another game. To this day, none of us are sure what brought on this sudden and drastic change of character. Jess believes that it was the insecurity and inability to accept that we were doing well in a setting where he thought he should have been the best. However, this story does have a good ending. Gunk and Jess did eventually break up, and I haven't heard from him since. We continue the campaign with Gunk's character frequently appearing as a comedic relief mini-boss. We just finished the campaign about a week ago, and we all figured that this would be a good/fun story to tell. On another fun note, Jess's dad recently announced that his working hours were going to be reduced for a few months, and has offered to DM a new campaign for us. I am extremely excited to see what he brings to the table. One last thing I should mention is that while Jess may have made a lot of mistakes here, Gunk definitely took advantage of her. He used the fact that she tends to be a people pleaser and that she had no prior experience of D&D. We were not hard on her for taking his side, and she did apologize for what happened. It's also not really fair to be extremely critical of her since we all made a lot of mistakes in this story. That is all, and I sincerely appreciate you reading. End of story. At least the story ended with everyone coming together to beat up the furry, which is an element that all happy endings should have. I'm kidding, put down the pitchforks. It's stories like these that are the hardest for me to read because I see a lot of myself in them. And I'm an aggravating internet narcissist, so you know that it's hella painful for me. I hope that my mid-story essay wasn't overly pretentious, but it's a topic that really strikes a chord with me. If I can be the surrogate big brother that I never had to some young buck out there and can encourage them not to make the same mistakes I did, then that's a win in my book. There is definitely a moral to this story. That being that the hyperfixation on your own status within a social hierarchy often will negatively affect, wait for it, your status in a social hierarchy. Now, I'm not claiming to be a wise man. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that wisdom is my IRL dump stat, but I do know a thing or two about the reality of the alpha male.
Viewing your relationships with other people as arbitrary competitions that exist only in your own head instead of things to be treasured is an excellent way to get yourself a one-way ticket to dying alone, and having your edgy persona used as a punching bag, as Gunk was so kind to have demonstrated for us. But you know what's a great way to make tons of friends and be loved by everyone? Sending me fan art! That's right, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake? This week's fan art comes from viewer Farbowl, who has submitted a very appropriate piece of fan art for this episode. I may have moved on from my alpha male days, but you know that iron is still life. But now I just channel that energy into helping other people lift their own heavy weights. You picked the right spotter for this bench PR, bro. I'm your lifeline. You rock. The only thing keeping you from meeting God. And I promise you, it is my duty as guardian of the gym to help others reach their own goals and strive to be... And he's dead. Thank you again, Farbowl, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.